This is the first edition, obviously much later than we would have preferred, but logistical issues have come in. So this is the first edition of the Khoodeelaar campaign, World Exclusive Diagnosis of Fleet Street. What do we mean by diagnosis? We mean by looking at the evidence and the contents of the behavior of the Fleet Street titles. This is the Boris graph, daily Boris graph. Boris graph of Monday. It has got a paywall, which means that all these papers have paywalls. Almost Financial Times, The Times, the scum that is Murdoch's son. We call it scum because it is absolutely disgracefully racist and ignorant and lying. Having said that, strictly evidentially, we cite items that are carried online by these titles as well, strictly on evidence as reference. When we say that, we don't say that we agree with the contents, but we say that as reference, that we can say cite as reference of their behavior. And here is the kind of distortion by the Boris graph. It's a racist distortion because they've been in Fleet Street and the British mainstream, and it is kind of infecting the USA and the Western Europe, and they're sharing the same kind of racist narrative. And as we pointed out before, not today, but earlier in previous editions, the word racism and racist, or the words racism and racist, are not used by them. And so therefore the word anti-racist is not used either, or anti-racism. These are not used. And the reason why they don't use the Fleet Street papers is racist, because they want to hide the existence of racism, and they want to deny conceivably the potential operation of anti-racist ideas or movements or comments. So both the absence and the suppression and the denial are part of the same agenda, that is the racist agenda to deny existence of racism. So in this item, which is a short item, they run short items on the lower kind of column, the lowest kind of panel, let's say, where they have about 5 or 6 short items. What is the number? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And one is the kind of news briefing. That is what they call it, or news. News briefing is also listed on the first column. And in the fourth column, there is this picture, beardless, picture of a beardless Nick Timothy, who is one of the two of Theresa May's kind of cabal of inner circle. Like, he was in a position comparable to Dominic Cummings in relation to Boris Johnson, the closeness of their position. But Nick Timothy was not as kind of talked about as much, anything like the way that Dominic Cummings has been talked about. While Nick Timothy, that is, was in position the as one of the two of the core kind of advisors during Theresa May's time as Prime Minister. I call him Sikh Timothy because of his kind of long range careerist record of lying and denying. But he's not the only denier and liar. The Telegraph itself, editorial, the Boris Graph, has got this item, which is a continuing kind of item about the sacking of a teacher or suspension of a teacher by the Eton School. Well, Eton School is not really Eton School, it's called Eton College, but that's a kind of diversion, slightly diversionary linguistic kind of exercise. What they're saying here is that the sacking of a teacher by the head teacher, the head teacher is called Simon Henderson, who has been in post for 5 years, as they say. And the reason I'm focusing on this one is because of the denial of racism, the denial of the concept of racism, and the suppression of the opinions and views against racism, although they are not anywhere near kind of frequent or widespread in this country, at least going by the media, as they should be, going by the evidence. But the fact that any sign of anti-racist activities or any sign of activities that challenge the, in the case of the Eton School, 500-year-old school, any tendency or any person making any decision that changes or seeks to change or overturn the 500-year-old kind of practices of denial of equality, if you like, the concept of equality. They are now calling such behavior, such actions, and such decisions as woke decision, W-O-K-E. And anything that they can say has been decided by woke decision makers, or woke decision, is lumbered in a package called wokeism. They've discovered this wokeism. Now, this time, the Eton School thing is about sexism. The teacher that has been dismissed, this person, the post is called master. So the master that has been dismissed because of their kind of sexist attitude and utterance or whatever. But outside of Eton, in other institutions, other parts of the UK, quote, society, because UK society is not kind of the same everywhere, and not only in the economic and social senses, but in terms of the varieties and the degrees of racism and hostility against equality and the concept of universality. But generally, what is happening outside of Eton, there is significant movement, as I said, despite the fact that it's not significant enough, that is not widespread enough, not rigorous enough, but that there is the fact of its existence, these operation activities against racism. So anything that is against racism is being treated by the racists using the contemptible and contemptuous term woke. Anyone who says racism is bad or racism needs to be opposed and eradicated, ended, recognized as it exists as a problem, and it should be dealt with and it should be removed. Anyone who says those things is called a woke person. So what they're doing by using this term that they've invented, woke, is also denying using the reference to racism and racists. So it's a treble kind of denial of racism existence and treble perpetration of racism and racist behavior. So what they're saying here in this paragraph, which is a short part of the longer piece that they're kind of running at page 9, is saying the headmaster of Eton College is said to be losing the confidence of staff amid growing discontent at his attempt to move the school in an aggressively woke direction. Since taking up the position 5 years ago, Simon Henderson has embarked on a program of cultural change at the 580-year-old school. Sources said the backlash over the dismissal of one of Eton's masters had brought to the fore underlying tensions at the school. And on page 9 of the Boris graph, we use the term Boris graph pejoratively. We don't use it as an acknowledgement, but as a denunciation of its role as the purchaser of Boris Johnson's political loyalty to the ideology that the Boris graph peddles and represents and perpetrates. And here on the page 9 detail, their headline changes, but it still doesn't recognize the full truth. Eton had no choice but to fire master of a lecture on feminism. Now, he didn't lecture on feminism. He attacked the idea of the equality of women. Dismissal driven by legal advice and not an issue of free speech, says elite college as row escalates. And last week, the Daily Telegraph revealed that Mr. Noland was dismissed for gross misconduct after recording a lecture which questioned current radical feminist orthodoxy. And the school is said here to charge £42,500 a year for each pupil. Now, there is no evidence whatsoever that because it is Eton, or it could be another overhyped kind of English private school, it has a superiority of knowledge imparted to its pupils. There is absolutely no evidence. So the 500 year, it has been too long, 500, too long. This corruption of the idea of education has been allowed to be perpetuated. And it is part of the corruption of the whole kind of establishment in this country, whether it's England, with a tail including Wales and completely denying Cornwall its identity, or United Kingdom within quotation marks as we use, because Johnson et al. Really are contemptuous of the Irish people, Northern Ireland or Southern Ireland, Irish people, and of the Scottish people, just as they are of the Welsh people and the Cornish people. So all this 500-year kind of thing, what is the 500-year claim based on? Apart from the fact that it has been in existence for 500 years, it has been perpetrating crime and criminality and contempt for most of the planet's people, and many in this country, in the England-centric kind of country, most ordinary people have been and are kind of treated with contempt by the Eton linked and Harrow linked and whatever linked traditions. The fact that the person was given the sack, the details of that fact are not important in this diagnosis. Because either way, neither the person who has been dismissed or sacked or suspended, or the head teacher, or the rest of the school, including what is called the provost, who is a former kind of minister, Waldegrave, who has been brought out of the retirement, whatever, and he has been spewing about his support for the sacking of the or dismissing of the particular master. He is the provost, so he would do that. He would not disown the action of Simon Henderson. So we are not taking sides. We are just saying that the whole school needs to be scrapped and turned into a non-exclusive, non-elitist kind of platform, organization that gives equal access to the schooling needs of the children. There is no education anywhere in this country, because if there were education in these institutions or through these institutions, then the country would be equal and fair and just and not corrupt and not ruled by crooks and unfits and misfits. And this applies as much to the Eton School or Eton College, whatever the second word is, as it does to Oxford and Cambridge and the other overhyped emblems and signals and symbols of English kind of superiority. There is no superiority except in the skills and the craft of cunning and lying and deception and cruelty in these institutions and through them. And the fact that the Daily Boris Graph is covering this is not unconnected with the fact that most of the Boris Graph political narratives and decision makers are linked to the likes of Eton School and or Oxford and Cambridge and their kind of agencies and tributaries. I'm saying this on the evidence, and I'm saying this by taking into account the widest possible range of evidence available from across the subcontinent of India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh, including Sri Lanka, and including Burma, including the Malaysian and Indonesian kind of areas, and other places where this idea of English schooling, including a military kind of thing version, which is the Sandhurst, this idea is sold aggressively. I'm saying the word aggressively. The Boris Graph says that Simon Henderson, since he took over at Eton, has been following an aggressive agenda of wokeism or aggressively woke agenda to change the 580-year-old history and tradition of this school. The aggressive selling of the idea of English superiority in schooling, in college, university, whatever, is sold across the subcontinent and in Southeast Asia. And the fact that Hong Kong was for a very long time the base for this kind of operation on site, if you like, illustrates that mentality of ruling the waves. Now, when it comes to the reality of acknowledging evidence of wrongdoing and wrong culture and wrong attitude and the wrongfulness of the agenda and the curriculum, the likes of the Boris Graf melt into stupidity, and they have nothing but to repeat banal and stupid slogans and phrases without admitting the evidence. We have no brief for the kind of lobbies, including the feminist lobbies, except to say that we include everyone as being entitled to equal and fair treatment. And equal and fair treatment are not available in Britain, which is why there is no acceptance by those who control the post power and decision-making powers. They don't accept this right, this entitlement. And these are the same people or similar minded people, if you like, who are also responsible for the packs and packs and packs of lies that spewed under the banner of Brexit. And these liars are now looking for an excuse in order to avoid having to face the consequences of bringing Brexit to the many and misleading the many with the Brexiteering lies and promises and propaganda. If they say that they are only opposed to wokeism, then they have to say, is their opposition to wokeism based on the evidence of their conduct, which is to, if their conduct is based on advancing and advocating universal equality and fairness and justice. But these criminals don't have that evidence because they are the perpetrators of inequality and unfairness and denial of rights to the many. And they've done this to the many, today's many, and the ancestors of the many, ordinary people across England and across Scotland and across Wales and across Ireland, before Ireland became a republic, the majority of it. And these criminals have done the same thing and are doing the same thing to the rest of the world, even now. But they're doing this under the cover of other excuses. For example, when Boris Johnson lied about the Turks invading millions, 50 million Turks, or whatever the number of Turks that he actually gave a number of, that were poised to take over England if England didn't vote for Brexit. He lied through every limb of his body. And Fleet Street, Boris Graf colluded with the lying. So if you take the definition of crime as it is in the various acts of parliament that define parts of crime and offense, but they don't say it's crime, but it's an offense. Because there is no kind of single code, book of code or codes that can be called the British Constitution or the UK Constitution as such. So the substitution of that has been various single acts of parliament defining various offenses and various kind of rules. And the other part of the unwritten constitution is the set of conventions. And convention, by definition, is a corrupt kind of institution. Because anyone who wants to abuse their position in power can ride roughshod over the convention. And if there is a kind of gap in the country politically in terms of democratic kind of framework or proper rigorous opposition, then they can make things worse, which is what has been happening in the last kind of 10, 11 years. Of course, the root for the worsening situation was begun by Tony Blair. And Blair did that with the complicity of Gordon Brown. Now, Gordon Brown was the other side of the dishonesty and corruption, while Blair was the one side of the dishonesty and corruption. Because Gordon Brown maintained a strategic and tactical kind of silence on Blair's crimes and criminality. And the only reason why Gordon Brown did that kind of silence was so that he would be able to get into the position of power after Blair left or was discredited out of post by the Labour Party. That's the reason. Therefore, Gordon Brown was equally to blame for what Blair did. We shall be going on to the next papers in the next part.